Welcome back, everyone. We are going to be looking at connective tissue for the next part of the lecture. Now, when we look at connective tissue, let's remember that when we spoke in another lecture about epithelium, epithelium is when we had cells that were closely packed together and very little extracellular matrix. And we would say, okay, it's many cells closely packed together. We know it's epithelium. These look like they're cube-shaped. It's one cell layer. We'll call these simple cuboidal epithelium. Now, connective tissue, on the other hand, it consists of widely spaced cells. They are separated by lots of extracellular matrix, or ECM. Now, connective tissue is the most abundant and variable type of tissue that we have in the body. It's involved in connecting organs to each other, connecting the epithelium to the rest of the body. It even gives support and protection, physical support and protection, because we're going to have um, bones. That's a type of connective tissue that's physical. Cartilage. We'll talk about cartilage. That is a physical support and protection, but also immune, because in blood is connective tissue. It's just what we consider liquid connective tissue. And we know with blood, we're going to have red blood cells and we have white blood cells. And red blood cells are easy, right? They are erythrocytes, and they're designed to carry oxygen and gases and CO2 and nitric oxide. White blood cells, especially B cells evolve into plasma cells. And then from plasma cells, we can make antibodies. And that's why it has immune function, because of our antibodies. Typically, when you look at antibodies, you'll see them as IgM or IgG or IgAs, but that's different types of antibodies. Some antibodies are produced immediately. Some antibodies have a delayed onset reaction. Connective tissue is also used to store energy and for heat production. So adipose is fat, or fat cells. We call them adipocytes. So adipocytes are involved in storage of energy, because you could store sugar in there. When you have sugar stored in a fat cell, we call them triglycerides, TG for triglycerides. And the movement of material, because blood is liquid connective tissue. So you can move lots of materials and nutrients and waste products using connective tissue. Some of the characteristics of connective tissue is highly vascular, meaning it has very good blood supply, with a few exceptions. Cartilage does not have a really good blood supply. So if someone hurts the cartilage in their knee, like the meniscus, medial meniscus or lateral meniscus, it takes a little while for it to heal because it's got poor blood supply. Ligaments also have a poor blood supply, and so do tendons. Okay. The connective tissue is composed of many types of cells, and there is a lot of non-cellular, non-living material between the cells. That's what's called matrix, or extracellular matrix, ECM. So on an overview, what we're going to be looking at is connective tissue. When we look at connective tissue, we're going to have three primary categories. And you should know this, right? This has shown up on previous lab quizzes where you would have to drag and drop these and put them in place. So the three main categories is that we have connective tissue proper, we have supporting connective tissue, and then we have fluid connective tissue. So when we think of fluid connective tissue, that's going to be blood. When we think of supporting, we have to talk about bone and cartilage. And when I talk about bone, we're going to be talking primarily about compact bone because there are some unique features regarding compact bone. And when we talk about cartilage, we'll talk about the three different types of cartilage: hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage, and the third type, fibrocartilage, which happens to be the strongest type of cartilage in the human body. When we look at connective tissue proper, this has loose connective tissue and dense connective tissue. And what differentiates loose from dense is when we look at the alignment of the proteins that make them up. Dense is when we have these type of protein fibers like collagen that are closely packed together in parallel direction. Whereas loose, you can have one protein fiber this way, one this way, and one that way. It's loose. It's not really structurally organized like dense connective tissue. But under dense, there's regular and irregular. And under loose, we have areolar, adipose, and reticular. So now you know why I said when we broke down tissues into epithelium, connective, muscle, and nerve, and I said of the four, muscle and nerve is the easiest. Epithelium, not too bad to learn, but connective tissue has a few more moving parts to it. So as I move through this, I'm going to be following this flow. So I'm going to start with connective tissue. We'll look at loose and dense. When we do loose, we'll talk about these three. When we do dense, we'll talk about these. When I get into supporting connective tissue, we'll talk about cartilage and bone, and then we'll talk about fluid connective tissue. So you'll see here, we're talking about loose connective tissue first with 1, 2, 3 different types. Then we'll talk about dense, 1, 2, 3 different types. Then we'll get into fluid for blood. Then we'll get into supporting, which is cartilage and bone. And then that's it. Okay, so let's look at loose connective tissue. And again, we have areolar, adipose, and reticular. Again, this is connective tissue proper, but it's considered loose connective tissue. So areolar connective tissue is going to provide the padding that's going to separate your skin from the deeper tissue. So if you were to pinch your forearm and pinch the skin along your forearm, your skin's going to pull away from the muscle. You can't really pinch the muscle. That layer between the skin and the muscle is called the areolar layer. Okay, and it's made up of elastic and collagen fibers. These are protein fibers. The areolar layer is a good layer where a lot of injections are delivered, okay, because it's vascular. Adipose, we're talking about fat cells. Now, under a microscope, sometimes students confuse this for a squamous cell. Now, a squamous cell has a nucleus that's in the center. A fat cell has a nucleus that's off to the side of the cell. That's why I put it here. Other than that, they kind of look a little bit similar under a microscope, so you have to look at the nucleus. Fat cells are really important, okay? Fat cells are going to store toxins. So when you consume a toxin, it shouldn't go to your neural system. It'll kill you. It'll damage you. So toxins get stored in fat cells. And as fat cells rupture over time, they'll go and leach out into blood and go into the liver, and you can detoxify them at a safe speed. Okay, reticular. This is going to provide the framework of support for many of your organs, reticular connective tissue. Dense, regular connective tissue. This is what tendons and ligaments are made up of. And this is because they have densely packed collagen fibers, right? This could be collagen fibers. They're closely packed, they're linear, they're in the same direction. So that's dense, regular connective tissue. Dense, irregular is when we have these collagen proteins and fibers that can be in many different directions. We're going to find them mostly in the skin, but in the dermis. Okay. And it's important to have these protein fibers in different directions because, right, if a massage therapist is massaging your back or your neck, they just don't work in a linear fashion. They can work in circles if they want. And that's due to the fact that the fibers are in all of these different directions, giving the skin a lot of flexibility and elasticity. The third type of dense connective tissue is elastic connective tissue. Now, we'll see these in certain ligaments, especially those of the vertebral column. Why would we find more elastic connective tissue in the vertebral column? That's because the 24 freely movable vertebrae are bony-wise very stable. They interlock with one another. In my over 25 years of practice, I'll be going on my 26th year of practice, I've never seen a patient that has had a dislocated vertebrae. That's because they're pretty stable, bony-wise. They interlock with one another. I've seen some misalignments, yes, for sure. I've seen scoliosis, yes. And I've seen spinal fractures, stable spinal fractures, but never one that is dislocated. But because the spinal column is so stable bony-wise, but it's flexible, we need to have ligaments. Ligaments go from one bone to another bone. So B is for bone. So when you go from bone to bone, connecting them and holding them in alignment, ligaments do that. But when you go from a bone to a muscle, that's where you have tendons. Tendons go from bone to muscle, ligaments go from bone to bone. But because the spine is very flexible and stable, we need a lot of elasticity and flexibility of those ligaments going from bone to bone. Okay? But other parts of the body that have ligaments, like the knee joint is very unstable, unlike the spine. You need lots more collagen for the knee joint and less elastic connective tissue. Okay. All right. Let's look at fluid connective tissue. When we look at fluid connective tissue, we're thinking blood primarily. And blood, we have red blood cells, we have white blood cells, and then we have platelets. Red blood cells are known as erythrocytes. Their primary job is to carry oxygen, whether it's O2 or whether it's carbon dioxide, CO2, or whether it's nitric oxide. NO, that's going to dilate your blood vessels, make them wider to decrease your blood pressure. Then we have white blood cells, which are leukocytes. Leuko means white, and these are going to fight infections. When you get into blood in AMP2, you will learn about granular sites and agranular sites. Those are the two different types of white blood cells. And under granular sites, you will learn BEN, B-E-N. B is for basophil, E is for eosinophil, and N is for neutrophil. Basophil, eosinophil, and neutrophil. Those are granular sites. And when you do the agranular sites, you will learn about the monocytes, and you will learn about the lymphocytes. The lymphocytes. M, I've got an M there, lymphocytes. And then platelets, of course, they are involved in creating a thrombus or a thrombosis, which is going to help stop bleeding. Lymph is the interstitial fluid that is found between the cells of the human body, and it's going to enter your lymphatic vessels. Okay, now we're on the supporting connective tissue. Now, supporting connective tissue, we'll talk about cartilage and then we'll talk about bone. So cartilage, we said, is avascular. The type of cartilage cell, when you see chondro, that means cartilage. It is a cartilage cell, chondrocyte. And the three different types are hyaline cartilage, which is the most common type of cartilage found in the body. It's going to be found at the end of the surface of the bones that are involved in forming the joint. Anywhere you have two bones that meet, that are freely movable, there's going to be cartilage there. That's hyaline cartilage. So when hyaline cartilage breaks down, we call it degenerative joint disease, DJD, also known as osteoarthritis, OA, osteoarthritis, which is not the same as rheumatoid arthritis. Degenerative joint disease and osteoarthritis, this tends to be a mechanical problem, and rheumatoid arthritis is more of an autoimmune systemic disease. Okay, the second type of cartilage is elastic cartilage. And elastic, just like the sound elastic, it allows for flexibility. And then the third type is fibrocartilage. Fibrocartilage is the strongest cartilage. It is a shock absorber. And fibrocartilage we find between each vertebrae. Those are called intervertebral discs, IVDs, intervertebral discs. That's fibrocartilage. You can also find fibrocartilage between the knee. It's just called a meniscus. And you can find it where the pubic bones are. It's called a pubic symphysis. Okay, so I've seen this show up in the past as well. So now it's kind of like a drag and drop for cartilage. So what is composed of a network of branching elastic fibers? Well, that's easy, right? Elastic cartilage. Which one is composed of thick parallel bundles? Well, the thicker it is, the stronger it is, and the strongest cartilage is fibrocartilage. Now, fibrocartilage is made up of collagen fibers, but type 1, whereas hyaline is made up of type 2, and it does not form thick bundles. So how do you remember the difference between type 1 and type 2 in the alphabet? A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, right? So F comes first. So F has the F with type 1 collagen fibers, and then the H comes after type 2 collagen fibers. And this is important because a lot of the nutraceuticals, the nutraceuticals that I use in my office, if someone has degenerative joint disease of the spine, then I'll make sure that the nutraceutical and the supplement that we give them specifically has type 1 collagen fibers. And if someone has degenerative joint disease, let's say the hips or the shoulders or the wrist and the fingers, then they're going to need more of type 2 collagen fibers because we want to supplement and rebuild the hyaline cartilage. Okay, let's look at this one. Now, these cells that we see, these are actually cartilage cells. When you see these like raindrop looking structures, those are the actual cartilage cells. But it's asking for the highlighted structure, which is all the aqua stuff. So remember, when we look at connective tissue, we see cells that are not closely packed together. These are scattered far apart, but it does have lots of the blue stuff. And the blue stuff happens to be the extracellular matrix. So this is the matrix of the hyaline cartilage. Okay, when we look at bone, we need to go over a few bone cells. So the biggies are going to be the osteoblasts and osteoclasts first. Now, osteoblasts and osteoclasts are involved in building up bone and breaking down bone. So osteoblasts are going to form bone, and osteoclasts are going to dissolve it. So osteoblasts are going to build up bone, and osteoclasts are going to break down the matrix of bone. So you have this building up and breaking down, building up and breaking down, and bones go through this remodeling, right? Remodeling is it's got to be built up, but then we got to break it down. Then you got to build up and break it down. So we have the osteoblasts and the osteoclast cells. When osteoblasts, if this is an osteoblast cell right here, it's going to produce matrix. And the matrix is like cement. And cement eventually is going to harden, right? The cement that osteoblasts create, it's like calcium salts. And these calcium salts in the cement are eventually going to calcify. It's going to harden. And when this osteoblast produces the matrix, it's going to get stuck, and it's going to get stuck in this cavity. And this cavity happens to be called a lacuna. I'll put an L for lacuna. And now this osteoblast can't produce any more matrix. It goes from an immature cell to a mature cell. And now when it's in the lacuna, this is called an osteocyte. It's a mature bone that's designed to just maintain the bone. So really an osteoblast becomes an osteocyte when it gets trapped in its own hollow lacuna, its own cavity, because of all the matrix that it produced. I'll show you what the concentric lamellae are, and I'll show you what an osteon is. But an osteon is what we find when we find compact bone. I'll show you what the canaliculi are as well. And I'll show you what the Volkmann's canal is. And I will show you the lacunae, I'll show you the periosteum, I will show you the endosteum, and I will show you the central canal or Haversian canal in this picture here. So on the top left, we see a long bone. And long bones have a epiphysis, a proximal epiphysis, and they have a distal epiphysis. And then they have the shaft of the bone that's called the diaphysis. Okay, and it has this part here that's called the metaphysis. It's also found here, metaphysis, M for metaphysis. So you have an epiphysis, a metaphysis, and a diaphysis. The shaft is the diaphysis. And when you look at the shaft, it has this hollowed out inner part called the medullary cavity, and it has this compact outer part. So what we're doing is this outer part here is this, from here to here. All of this. And that's what we call compact bone. When we look at a compact bone, this is where we'll see these individual osteons. And an osteon looks like a tree that was cut down, right? When you cut down a tree, it has all of these rings. And all of these rings are called concentric rings or concentric lamellae. Concentric lamellae. In the center of all the concentric lamellae is what we call the central canal or a Haversian canal. And that's where you have arteries, veins, and nerves. Bones are vascular. When you break a bone, you can bleed. When you have this pooling of blood in the bone, when you have a pooling of blood, it is very painful. It is very, very painful. You can feel the pressure of blood pooling in there. That's when you have this like tumor of blood that's accumulating inside the bone from a bone fracture. Okay. The outer part of the bone, on the bottom right, that outside layer is called the periosteum. The periosteum is this outer layer, and this is where ligaments are going to attach to, or tendons are going to attach to bone at the part of the periosteum. That's the outer layer. The inner layer of bone is called the endosteum, right? Osteum, osteology, that's bone. End for in, and peri is out. So endosteum, this is where we have spongy bone. It looks very spongy. The outer portion is more compact. Okay. Now, these lamellae, these are your concentric lamellae that make the appearance of like a tree that was chopped down. But in between that osteon and this osteon, where we have these concentric lamellae, we have lamellae in between, but those are called interstitial lamellae. And all interstitial lamellae are remnants. They're remnants of older osteons. Remember I said you have osteoblasts and osteoclasts? And osteoblasts build up bone and osteoclasts break down bone. So when these osteons are being broken down, you end up with these interstitial lamellae. Okay. So here, what is the highlighted structure? This whole thing is highlighted. That is an osteon. Okay. Now, in the blue region here, the blue region are the cavities called lacunae. And what sits in the lacunae? That's where we have an osteocyte. Osteocytes are going to sit in the lacunae. So you can have, here's the lacunae, here's the cavity, and let's say here's the osteoblast that's now called an osteocyte, and then it has these extensions that come off of it. And these extensions that come off of it are form these canals. So they're called canalicules. Okay, that's those canaliculi. Okay, the central canal, that's right there. Okay, good place to take a break.